Welcome to Bad First Impression, a podcast about movies and where we meet them. Today I have returning to the podcast Alex Campo, filmmaker who we previously had on to discuss his obsessive need to finish watching every film in Nicolas Cage's filmography.
I got an update for you.
Yes, that was actually the first point of business I wanted to go over here. Is that you have now seen every screen credit of his?
I've seen every screen credit of his and one uncredited performance of his.
What is the uncredited performance?
There's a movie with Robert Redford from 1980. He's 15 years old in it, and apparently he's an extra, but I couldn't find him.
Did you like the movie anyway?
Yeah, it was actually pretty good.
It's got Redford in it. It's probably pretty good.
You know what? Watching a movie without Nicolas Cage in it, I forget that they exist, but they're actually kind of good sometimes.
Yeah, so I wanted to discuss this a little bit. So how does this make you feel? Do you feel, infected with a terrible purpose, or do you feel fulfilled?
I feel like I finally accomplished something.
Really? You had not accomplished anything prior to completion of this?
I think watching 200 hours of Nick Cage films has really done something really special. I'm in a very exclusive club. I found out there's an entire subreddit about it.
What is it called?
It's called The One True God.
Why is that the title?
Don't know. Couldn't tell you, but I could tell you he's only in one Christian film that I've seen. It's called Left Behind. Left Behind. Yes, he's a pilot. And that's the movie where the rapture takes place during his flight.
Yes, that's actually relevant to today's conversation. We'll circle back to that in a moment. I don't know. What do you feel like you've gained in terms of understanding?
Well, I mean, he was my favorite actor before this whole thing. And I felt like every time I had watched a movie of his, no matter how good, no matter how bad the movie was, he was always good. He was always entertaining, and he always did his best. I kind of get into a rhythm sometimes where I like watching really bad movies from prominent actors. Like before we knew that Bruce Willis was sick, I was watching all the Bruce Willis direct-to-video, Redbox direct-to-video movies, because that was an interesting case of completely the opposite, where it was someone who's not trying at all. Nick Cage appears in movies like that, but he's still the main character. He still has 50, 60 minutes of screen time, and he still actually tries in these garbage films.
Yeah, he's basically never just showing up for, like, Bruce Willis. Obviously we have more context now, but he was at a point where he was getting paid for $1 million to show up for a day, say yippee-ki-yay motherfucker, like out of a helicopter.
And he did it as a joke. He did it as a joke back in Planet Terror, where he shows up for one scene. He did it as a joke for that one. Yeah, he's in one scene of that movie as a joke.
Isn't that The Player?
Ooh, I don't remember.
The Player, he's in the, I guess, spoilers for The Player, you should have watched it by now. But the end, when there's the fake movie going on, he's the action hero in it.
Oh, yes. But in Planet Terror, he shows up as just it's a joke that ended up becoming true. Is he's the actor who shows up, gets a $2 million paycheck just for showing up for a day and then goes home. Yeah. That was the joke in that movie, and it ended up just being the end of his career. So knowing that you have seen a fair number of bad Nicolas Cage films now, you still feel this way about him, that he always tries and that he is still your favorite actor? There are very few cases, I would say, where he doesn't try. There are very few that feel like he's just collecting a paycheck, because even in those, it feels like he really does respect the art of acting, and it's he kind of has a theater kid energy about it that way. He very much does.
This is sacred to him. I think.
I would say so.
That's awesome. I wanted to ask about one specific movie. I know is one that you are holding for the end.
Yes.
It's my probably favorite Nicolas Cage movie. It's one of my favorite movies, is Wild at Heart. Do you have any specific thoughts? Just a little pocket.
I think Wild at Heart is now one of my favorite movies. Yeah. I'll eventually make a Nick Cage tier list. All the movies that I've seen, I'll rank over something. But that would be right at the top, up there with Mandy and Bad Lieutenant.
Bad Lieutenant is one that the more distance, I liked it a lot when I saw it, and the more distance I've had since I've seen it, the more I realize I really love that movie. I think it's fantastic.
But I think general thoughts on Wild at Heart. I was never a David Lynch fan. The stuff I had seen from him was obviously the wrong stuff. Everything I've seen with him since I started this Nick Cage marathon, he's in 2 David Lynch films. One of them is called Industrial Symphony No. 1, The Dream of the Brokenhearted.
I know.
Unwieldy title.
Since you brought that up, we love those on this podcast. Since you brought that up on your last appearance, I've actually had other people text me and be like, hey, that movie that Campo brought up.
Yeah.
I watched it. I thought it was really great.
It's
I
beautiful.
really
You should watch it.
I still have not gotten to it.
It's one of those things where you see the influence that brought onto some of his other projects. There's a song in that one that ended up in Wild at Heart. And the rest of the music ends up in Twin Peaks at some point.
Yes.
So it was all around the same time period. This is all late 80s, early 90s. And Nick Cage is the intro of the film.
Yeah. I love that movie so much. I actually read it's a series of, I think, 8 novellas. And it's I'm trying to remember that. I think it's Barry Gifford is the writer.
Wild at Heart is
the writer of Wild at Heart, both the novel and the film. And then also he wrote Lost Highway for Lynch later. So they clearly enjoyed working together.
Yeah.
But the novel series is called the Sailor and Lula series. Huge fan of those. They're these very kind of like melancholy Southern Gothic tragedy romance. It's really great. I'd strongly recommend it. It's like sometimes in print, like it depends on if you go to a used bookstore, if you get lucky, like at a place that like maybe keeps some old stuff in print. But I love Wild at Heart as well.
I loved it so much to the point where if I were to do another, let's say, working showman's entire filmography, it might be David Lynch.
Yeah,
I know, very original thing for someone to do, but this
segues into my my final question just on the subject before we get into the movie we're actually here to discuss today. Do you see yourself doing this with any other actor again?
I think the only other actor that I've binged accidentally is Denzel Washington, and I might. But there are a lot of Equalizer movies now.
There's 3. There's not that many.
That's a lot. More sequels than Nick Cage ever had. Nick Cage has never appeared in more than 2 films in the same series.
Wait,
you know that?
I think is it 3 or 4 sequels he's done?
I think it's good.
Because I think
good
I
trivia.
can guess
It might be 4. Okay, go for it.
I can guess them.
Go for it.
It's Ghost Rider: Spirit of Vengeance.
Correct.
The Croods 2.
Yes.
National Treasure 2.
Correct. Is there one more?
I think
there's one more that's coming out soon. It's Lords of War 2 they're making for some reason.
He's never done like a Redbox sequel to one of his own before.
Well, I mean, there is a sequel to Deadfall, but it's totally unrelated. It's called Arsenal. It's like he's playing the same character and
there's no other.
It has the director's blessing, but
there's no other examples like the 3 I just listed where he's in the original as well.
Like a direct sequel.
It's a direct. No. He's playing the character in movie 1 and 2. I think those are.
I think I'm gonna remember it later. I mean, Spider-Man is also coming out, and he will be in the second Spider-Man movie. Oh no!
Wait, no, the second Spider-Man movie is out.
Third Spider-Man movie. He wasn't in the second one.
He skipped 2.
Yep.
Okay. I'm trying
it might
to
just
think.
be 3. It might just be 3.
It might just be those because I'm really struggling to think of any others.
Yeah,
but
I'm the one who should know.
Yeah, you're the expert. I do this with directors a lot, and like directors are usually, unless you're talking about someone like Clint Eastwood who's got like 40 movies, it's not really an issue most of the time because it's like, well, whatever. Even long-winded directors, usually it's like in the 20 to 25 range.
Nick Cage has 114.
It's crazy. How many does he have? We'll touch on this in more detail before we're done here, but how many does he have in the can right now? Even undated ones. Do you know?
6 listed on IMDb right now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
But he also says he's retiring soon, so those might be the last ones.
Yeah.
One of them is called Long Legs, and it's directed by Oz Perkins. That's the one I think I'm most excited for.
Who's Oz Perkins again?
Oz Perkins is Anthony Perkins' son. He's a horror film director. If you've ever seen The Blackcoat's Daughter, that was him.
I know the name. I don't think it's from Blackcoat's Daughter. I think I know his name from somewhere else.
You might. Oh, yeah. He also had an appearance in Nope. He was in Nope very briefly.
That's where I saw it?
Yeah, he played like a film director in Nope.
Well, I'm glad you finished this project.
Yes.
Congratulations, I suppose. I don't really know how exactly to commemorate this. But,
I have to have a real hobby now, yes.
Yeah, I know. That's the thing is, though, like, I ask you this about any other actors because I'm like, just in case you need something to keep yourself busy, here you go. Here's another. I actually really struggle. I don't think I could follow an actor that way because there's so much less, not consistency and quality, because many directors have like simultaneously, there are a lot of directors who have like a masterpiece and something almost unwatchable in the same filmography, but they're coming from the same tendencies and like an authorial voice. Whereas with an actor, that's not always the case. You have things like
you watched all the Sam Raimi movies.
I did watch all the Sam Raimi
We were talking
movies.
about that where yes, he has something that's definitely a masterpiece, and then he has something like Crime Wave.
I like Crime Wave.
Okay, fine.
I like Crime Wave.
Fine.
I mean, Raimi's got a couple that I really like. I
what about
think
For the Love of the Game?
For Love of the Game it's mostly that it's just really boring.
Yeah.
It's not even badly made. It is weird that he chose to make it. I don't, because there's nothing, I don't really see what he's obsessed with there. Because for me, the most fundamental thing behind like, okay, what attracted Raimi to this project? It's usually that the central character messes with a force that he shouldn't mess with. And the rest of the movie plays out in such a way that just implies that it's like, this is your life now, is dealing with the consequences of this one choice.
Yes.
That's about a baseball player who gets an injury to his hand. I wouldn't really call that like an arcane Lovecraftian force is injuring your hand. And it's the rest of the movie is mostly about him like being
it's also
mean
like
to
the
a
only
lady.
one. Well, it's one of the few that has no grotesque violence in it. But speaking of grotesque violence, should we move on to the film?
Grotesque. We're gonna grow some text.
Some grotesque violence. Should we move on to the main topic of today's discussion?
We're here to discuss a movie that neither of us really has much love for. I don't know. When we walked out,
I despise this movie, honestly.
Like, I walked out of this and I'm like, I actually think the craft is all there. This is a technically very well-made movie. It's shot by Caleb Deschanel. Mel Gibson is a good director.
Oh yeah, let's name drop this film for a second.
We're talking about 1, 2, 3.
The Passion of the Christ. 15 minutes in.
I think this is a well put together movie.
It's a really beautifully shot movie. Who was the cinematographer again?
Caleb Deschanel.
So I'll talk about right away with the cinematography. Beautiful anamorphic shots all over this thing, but seeing anamorphic lens flares on the face of Jesus Christ is a little strange.
Yes. There's the question of whether making this movie at all for any purpose to any end is blasphemous.
I would say so, and we can get into why.
Yeah.
But before we do, I just want to remind everybody that I want to make sure I quote this directly. For where 2 or 3 gather in my name, I am there with you. That's Matthew 18:20.
So Christ is with us.
It's 3 of us on the podcast today.
Okay.
Now, I also want to say I'm not here.
Make sure he has enough space on the couch.
Yes, of course. I also want to make sure
We've
to
left
let
room
everybody
for
know
Jesus.
we're not here to debunk Christianity. That's not the kind of thing that we're here doing. I'm brought on last time as an expert on Nick Cage films. Today, I'll come on as an expert of Christianity. I'll say confirmed Catholic. Confirmed Catholic. I'm here in my Pentecostal Reds today.
Yes, I'm not a Catholic. My father was raised Catholic, so like, I guess I'm ethnically Catholic. I don't.
It's not the same as with other religions where you could say that. With Catholic, you have to like. There's a reason it's confirmation.
Yeah.
It's like you have to take a test to make sure that you can stay Catholic. You have to sign paperwork.
I didn't pledge, so I didn't go through all the rigmarole of it.
Yeah, there are sacraments of which I think I've done 4.
But this is a movie that I think you and I both have a kind of mutual childhood association with it, which I think is an upsettingly common thing.
Yeah, they made me watch this in school.
Yes. Do you want to go over your kind of initial exposure to it and the beginning of your relationship to this movie? This movie came out in 2004.
So 2004, I was in 4th or 5th grade. That's when I watched the movie. I watched the movie and either we did a field trip or it was like whatever VHS copy of it. And they showed it to us in school. They didn't even ask for a parent's permission or anything like that. It's just Sunday school. We're going to watch Passion of the Christ. And you know what? We did it every single year. Up until that point, we had another film that we watched every year. It was called Jesus of Nazareth. And that is 6.5 hours long. And that's usually
Is it a miniseries? Or is it
it's technically a miniseries.
Okay.
We'd watch it over 3 weeks.
Sure.
Sunday school being 2 hours. We would watch it over 3 weeks. But we would watch that up until Passion of the Christ came out, when we would then watch both movies. And I want to talk about it because let's talk about when we watched this movie, because this was part of a series for Christmas, right?
So I think that like putting it
was
around
Christmas.
Around Christmas was like, we watched this movie on December 20th. It was a series that ran at the Anthology Film Archives all through December. It was called was called Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ exclamation mark at the movies. And it was a look at the different ways Jesus has been portrayed on screen throughout history, and kind of what he means to us as a cultural object, how we interact with him outside of, worshiping him, if that's the case.
That's what I want to talk about the most, is the depiction here.
Yeah, and the depiction of Christ in the film?
Yes. And I will start off right off the bat, and I will say that's the biggest failure of this film.
Yes. In what way?
Meaning that when you're talking about someone who has multiple religions based off of their teachings, and you do not include those teachings, that it's a kind of a failure of the subject matter. When you treat it as a historical event rather than teaching, if you're trying to make a Christian film, which this is absolutely taken as a Christian film, it is not a Christian film whatsoever.
So I kind of want to look at it in the context of the way it was presented to us there. A lot of the other stuff they were showing during the series was experimental, satirical, just outright critical of Christianity, the tenets of Christianity even. And this was being presented alongside it. And I actually have their December program here.
Okay.
But I maybe I'll read it later, but their description of it was they're like, this is this crazy gonzo action movie. And I'm like, so the thing is that we can talk about this in more detail, but this idea that we might take this thing that I think we can both agree, you can get into the weeds about genre, but I think we both agree this is a propaganda film.
It's a propaganda film. That's actually an interesting question, is what is the genre of this movie? Because it is not an action movie. I wouldn't call it a genre. But it has
set pieces.
I mean, there are set pieces.
In the most perverse definition of them.
But our hero, is he even the protagonist? He's losing the whole time.
Well, he wins at the end there.
Yeah.
Well, we are actually the winners.
Well, we're the winners because he did that for us.
Yeah.
Don't forget.
I'll
say I like this movie this much, but I like Jesus this much.
Yes. I have Jesus the guy, to be clear, never had an issue with him. No. I don't like.
I just wish this movie talked about him more rather than talk about what those awful Romans did to him.
This movie is weirdly not that much about Jesus.
No, it's not. It's about.
And when it is, it's mostly, it's a lot the performance of Jim Caviezel gives is mostly tossing his head back and shouting.
Yes. It's 2 hours of Jesus going, ooh. That's my impression of the Minecraft noise.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't catch your meaning. So this is something that I think my experience with this, I was my parents are halfway. I want to give them credit where it's due. When this came out in 2004, there was this perception among kind of the Midwest Christian household I was growing up in that this was my mom was not immediately an acolyte of this film. She was just it's important for Christians to go see this so that we can have an opinion on it, which actually I'm realizing really shapes the way I interact with film a lot, is that it's almost less about, am I interested in this specific movie? But it's more about, will having seen this movie mean that I will then have cultural capital to have more valid opinions on a wider array of things?
Because this was a movie you had to see when it came out.
Yes.
And that's great. I mean, that's great marketing, and this made a lot of money, and we'll get back to that. But
my mom took me to, we had a church that rented out a movie theater for it. A timed screening that everybody in the congregation could go together. And we were in for, I guess we're spoiling Passion of the Christ / the Four Gospels. You had a lot of time to read them. That's becoming my go-to joke. Yeah. I'm you've 2,000 years to get to this.
It differs from the book a little bit.
It differs from the book.
Yeah, but there are also 4 books that differ from each other.
Yes. I was going to read the 4 Gospels prior to this because I haven't touched biblical text since I was a child, and then I decided not to for all the obvious reasons.
A little difficult to read.
But I went to the showing. There's about 10 minutes in, and we'll actually get to our specific experience with the beginning of this film as well. At once we get more specifics to the theater, but we got about 10 minutes in, which is just past like the arrest of Jesus Christ by the Romans, not the Pharisees aren't the arresting party. The Romans.
The Romans are the arresting party.
Yes.
The Pharisees are, we're not going to talk about the Pharisees too much because if you want to know how the Pharisees are portrayed in this film, you can probably just look up Mel Gibson's arrest.
Yes.
Not great. And I don't want to talk about that too much because this will get automatically flagged just for us talking about how that portrayal is done. So we probably are not going to do that. I
don't have more complex thoughts on that portrayal other than it's bad.
Oh, it's bad.
And it's irresponsible.
Yes.
And from what this isn't even alleged, from what the director was arrested for doing.
Yes.
It's not very hard to, it's not hard for me to not give him the benefit of the doubt in the case of the portrayal of them.
You heard it here first. Mel Gibson will not see inside the gates of heaven.
You're right. And I don't know. I don't have a follow-up to that. But we get about just past the arrest. I think it's Judas is running away from it. And Judas
is the one who very famously tipped them off.
Yes. Jerk.
Yeah.
Shouldn't have done it. But he is hiding under a bridge. And this was actually a laugh scene for me in the movie.
It's kind of funny.
There's like this like demon who like apparates before. It's a jump scare.
It is a jump scare. It's literally like Satan jump scare in the film.
Yes. Judas Iscariot turns to his left. He sees an apparated version of Satan himself. And it's like this, like, it is this like, it looks like what was the early YouTube meme where like you saw the road and then a big like
it does look
face.
Like that. So it was that car driving down the street, right?
Yes.
I was thinking maybe like the scary maze game. It did look a little bit like that.
Yes. It's very, and it's weird because this movie is.
It came out at like a time where jump scares were popular.
Yeah, where jump scares were popular, and also where the idea of like internet culture was really starting to permeate something. So it's so funny to me that the couple depictions of like Satan are like so tied with what they were starting to look like from non-professional like online filmmakers who are portraying like demons and scary things. It's just so funny. But
it's a bald guy in a robe half the movie. Too.
Yes, but it's I believe that performer is a woman who like plays the personified version of Satan who appears more frequently. Funnily enough, the Film Archives description of it refers to them as non-binary Satan, which that seems like an extremely charitable reading of the film.
Yeah.
I think the portrayal is just completely without any like sexing one way or the other. But that scene where you see the jump scare Satan, I immediately like tucked my head under because it is like shocking in a way that I would have been 10 this summer this came out. It's really crazy to me that like a summer blockbuster the year I was 10 was
was it a summer film?
I believe let me double check its release.
So technically as you're doing that, I'll talk about it a little bit. Like this is an Easter film and I mean, it's a Good Friday film, but like how many films are there about the Easter season? You have this and you have Judy Garland in Easter Parade. Those are like the only two Easter films that I can think of.
So funny, this is a February release.
A February
So I'd be pretty freshly.
Oh, so it was leading up to Easter.
Yeah, so I'd be pretty freshly 10 years old. But I immediately like hid my head. Because it is like pretty upsetting imagery, even if now I can kind of laugh at it because I've seen more horror movies and I have a different relationship to the material, because it's crazy the way that like modern American Christianity, the way that it's kind of like ingrained into you is as a scare tactic.
Yes.
And you're told by these people who are twice your size up till then that Satan is that's a fact. It's real. He's a guy. And you see this like sudden, it's really, really scary.
Yes.
I immediately like hid under a coat, like put my head in my mom's lap. My brother, who was, I think had actually like the week prior to this movie coming out, we probably weren't seeing it opening weekend, but the week prior to coming out had just turned 7.
Oh,
he was there as well. And this is a really common thing. People made young children see this movie.
They made me watch it in school.
Yeah. Exactly. And it was the thing you said about how they didn't even ask for parental permission because it is an R-rated movie.
It's an R-rated movie, but it's a Christian film. And, I grew up Catholic, and being Catholic is like, it is all about it's the guilt. Sorry.
Yes.
A lot of it is the guilt. And it is the reason why this is 2 hours of torture. This is a 2-hour torture film.
Yes.
Is for that guilt factor. It's Jesus went through all of this for you. You owe him one.
Yeah. And it's this is an early childhood exposure to you where they're basically telling you, and part of owing him one is you have to sit and watch this really scary thing.
Yes.
My brother immediately burst into tears. He's a little boy, and my mom, to her credit, because I realized we were very lucky because this was not the reaction of everybody's parents, realized this is a bad idea. And she took my brother out.
Good.
I think.
Did you watch the rest of the movie at 10 years old?
I had to. My aunt and cousin were there as well.
Mm-hmm.
They were like, my mom was like, you can hide your face, but like you're older. Like I think she was trying to reconcile what she was being told by everyone around her, which is this is an important film. Children need to see this. This is a really important story to be told. Which, funnily, I've actually read the story. I've read the story a bunch of times. Actually, spoilers. I know I read the book. It's no big deal. She's like, you stay with your aunt, and I spent most of the movie kind of under that. Every now and then my aunt would try and coax me out. She'd be like, they're talking now. Like, you
have to read.
And I would like look up and I would look up and see Romans arguing with Pharisees over someone's fate. And then out of nowhere, really gory, bloody violence.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just I would maybe try a glimpse of it here or there. I was really squeamish with horror as a kid.
Yeah.
I didn't really I don't think I started watching horror movies until I was like over 18.
Yeah, me too. So, college age is when I started really getting into it.
And I started, really had enough of it. But this movie and I don't. So I've been in the room while it's played.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents, after that experience, really realized we don't need to put our kids through this. They were parents who tried to emphasize that like religion is really important. But I think they were able to square the whole where they're like, but we don't need to make them watch us, like this like really like scarring thing. And that is not the case the thing is my sister is she's a year and a half younger than my brother. So she's 5.5, 6. She was not made to go in at all initially. And, there were many children who were that age or younger who, had to go in and, either sit under a coat or if they had a stricter parent, sit up and watch this thing and then, watch it a couple months later on Easter and then watch it every year thereafter.
I was actually surprised that I didn't see any children in the theater when we were there.
No, because that was the
framing of it.
That's a difference of intentionality in how it was presented to us.
Yes.
But so I wanted to ask, my parents never really touched on this again. They never tried to justify the decision or say, oh, hey, this is how you need to, it's really important that you watch this. I think they realized, and my parents are not horror film people at all. So I think for them, it was a nice out. They immediately just stopped. They didn't bring it up. We didn't have to show we'd maybe talk, we'd say, oh, I saw it. It's so good when we talk to people at church. Did your parents ever give you any reason or justification for why this was an important thing for you to see?
So my dad is actually very religious man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He reads the gospel every week at church, or at least he did at his old church. He moved to a new church recently. He's not in that, but growing up, he was like one of the Sunday school teachers.
Yeah.
So he was very into, you have to watch these kind of things. He liked Jesus of Nazareth more. But he's also never been a horror movie kind of guy.
Oh, because it had more. It's book accurate.
It's more book accurate. It's more about the teaching of it. Speaking of which, I do want to talk about what we did miss the first 10 minutes. We'll get back into why. Yes. But I want to talk about what's not in the film, and this is very important.
Sure, of course.
Hours before, if you know the whole story, hours before this film starts, there is a very famous scene called the cleansing of the temple. And what that is Jesus goes into a temple and he finds a bunch of merchants in there. And in that temple, the merchants are exchanging money. They're selling animals for sacrifice.
This is what Jesus is arrested for.
This is why he's arrested. But what he does is he sees all these merchants selling merchandise in the temple, and he takes some cords that he finds, he makes a whip, and he starts flipping over the tables and whipping these guys. And he says, you have turned my house into a den of thieves.
Yes.
There are two morals to that story. One, don't sell church merch. And two,
hilarious coming from this movie.
This is why it was eliminated from the film. You're not supposed to sell church merch.
Yes.
You are not supposed to make money off of the church.
Your opening scene shouldn't be an indictment of your decision.
Which is why it's a donation to
church
and not an entry fee.
Yes.
You are not allowed to make money off the church. That's the whole thing. And that's why Jesus whipped the merchants. And then secondly, the more important thing to take away is like, let's talk about how to interpret the gospel real quick, because
sure,
this is very important stuff here. And
it's just so funny how quickly we like dove into theology.
I'm passionate about this because people do it wrong, and this is a serious moment here.
Oh, of course, sure.
If the moral of the story is not Jesus will fix things for you. The moral is do as Jesus did and learn from what he did and how to live. The moral of the story when you see corruption, you act on it. That's the story. Don't wait for Jesus to do it for you. He saw it happening. He acted on the corruption. That's what you should be doing.
And it's that really frustrating thing where you're raised with this belief nominally, and to watch it kind of be weaponized and taken in bad faith. Taken in bad faith is kind of like my operative phrase here, where it's like you're taking you're misshaping what's actually said, and you're using it to whatever is convenient or profitable for you.
Yeah, I'm also Catholic, so I know.
Yes, and this is and it's
the church that famously sold tickets into heaven.
Yeah, yes, this led to my personal disillusionment with the church, and how I just kind of can't interact with it because it is very hard watching that degree of hypocrisy just in like day-to-day actions, often from the people who most forwardly say, I'm a Christian, give me credit for it.
Yes.
Especially when it's, what is it? It's like, you're supposed to, the one I would always like throw out, when I'm getting in arguments with my parents, be like, is you're supposed to pray in your closet, meaning that like your Christianity is supposed to be a private, personal thing.
Correct.
That you don't basically like use as a personality trait or to get credit for anything. Yep. Or even honestly as a signifier of like personal value. I don't think you're supposed to say, I'm a Christian, therefore you can trust me, or I am a good person. You're supposed
to follow by example. Your
actions should say that for you. And
yes, you follow by faith, but also follow by example. That's the part that's missed.
It's kind of it's the same thing as like, was it Alito who said about pornography, is like, to paraphrase him a little bit, he says like, look, I can't define a Christian, but I know one when I see one.
I see it. Yeah.
Yes. Before we get too far into discussion of the film specifically,
yes,
I do want to, you referenced this a little bit already. This is a show first. This is a real rarity for me. I'm usually very good about not doing this because I'm meticulous. I show up to movies very early. We were at this movie 20 to 30 minutes. We were there. We were there for quite some time. Initially, this showing was advertised as being preceded by a series of kind of satirical shorts, cartoons, with like, and I think that was part of the presentation, is they're like, this is silly. We can maybe look at Jesus as absurdist. So when we went into the theater and something other than Passion of the Christ started playing, I assumed that this was just part of the pre-show. What followed is a frankly embarrassingly long period of time.
It was about 20 minutes, I think.
So I looked, we went into the wrong theater. We went into the wrong theater. We were, the show that we were supposed to be there for started at 7. This showing was slated to start at 6:45. So I assumed the pre-show was just happening early. And like, if people were coming in, it wouldn't be a big deal. No, I looked up the name of the movie. It is called, Ryan K. Le Jerez, which translates to Nothing But the Hours, directed by Alberto Cavalcanti.
That was supposed to be French.
Yes.
That was bad.
I know. French is the one that I just can't do. Did you think it was Spanish instead?
I didn't know what that was.
I don't know. I mean, if you want to go for it.
Oh no.
Here's my show notes. Yeah, exactly. You want to roast me.
I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Look how easy it is. It's a 1926 experimental documentary that mostly
That was 26?
Yes.
That felt I would have guessed like 1898. That's what I would have guessed. That's what it felt like. It felt like this is the first thing ever shot on film. That's what it felt like.
Very few things preserved from that long ago. But this is an experimental documentary that consists mostly of prolonged shots of close-ups of just kind of ordinary things around. This is happening in Paris, mundane activities, and it's meant to just be kind of a slow cinema sort of
I was
thing.
waiting for the plot. So like
there is
when
no
it's
plot.
when it's written
It's not
down,
gonna
I can
happen.
understand French a little bit.
Mhm.
And I was like reading it. It's just like in French, it says a woman walks on the street, and it's just like a shot for like 2 minutes of a woman walking on the street.
Yes,
It's like that's what it was. It was just supposed to be an ordinary
This
life.
is a little bit more esoteric
Very
than
French.
then those are like quite literal documented. What is it? The arrival of a train at the
that would have
the
been
arrival of
yes.
a that's what is the full title? The arrival of a train at the station of
longer than the film
La
is,
Ciotat. Like it's literally like a 3-second clip, and that is titled literally the way that like most older art pieces are. This is what the film depicts. This movie, which I'm spending way too much time on because it's not what this is about.
Well, we were there for almost 20 minutes.
We were there for almost 20 minutes. The total runtime of it is 53 minutes, by the way. So we would have eventually we would have caught on to it. But we sat in there for way too long. I thought it was part of the pre-show.
It felt like a bit.
It really did. It
didn't feel like a real film.
The kind of, and pardon my French here, shitheadedness with which the Jesusing program had been planned.
Yes.
Made me think maybe this is one big long joke. Eventually we're there for, I look at my watch. It's like 7:05. And I go to the box office and I said, I think you're playing the wrong movie. And she was way nicer to me than she should have been in that situation.
Oh, they were so nice there.
She was so sweet.
Did you plug the theater, by the way?
Yes, the Anthology Film Archives.
Yes, of course. They were lovely.
Yes, I want to talk about them also before we get into the movie. But she very kindly directed me, told me the upstairs, which I assumed was a separate establishment. I thought it was this is my first time here. This is actually, I think, the first time I'm doing an episode at a theater I'm going to for the first time. But she directs me upstairs where there is this large, like high ceiling, kind of wonderful, it was a very nostalgic theater for me. I really loved it. I thought it was great.
It felt like it didn't fit in the building. Like it was huge.
It is the kind of the geometry of it doesn't really work out.
The theater playing the experimental French film was like the size of this set.
Yes, I'm not exaggerating. I do believe that like the screen would fit in here wall to wall.
But it was like big for a New York City movie theater.
Yes.
Yeah.
We went in there and I'm really excited to go back, by the way. I thought that auditorium was fantastic. It's down in Soho. It's a really wonderful theater. It's got a really great old New York vibe to it. There are no concessions because they're very, they have kind of they
didn't have popcorn. They had unleavened bread.
I'm gonna let that one sit for a minute so that it can rise in a second. There, I stole it, and then
you made it better,
and then made it. Did I? I don't think so. But it's kind of like an old school, like an old school kind of like art house movie theater. The movie that we accidentally sat in on for 15 minutes is part of a never ending series called Essential Cinema that they just play. That's kind of like old or historically relevant in the case of that movie. Films that are just the term is used to eat your vegetables. I usually enjoy these movies a lot more than I like vegetables too.
It's not why we were there.
Hit on vegetables. Yeah. Vegetables are good.
But anyway. That wasn't why we were there. We were there to watch Passion of the Christ.
We were there to watch Passion of the Christ.
We were watching a 2-hour torture film that they showed to children. This horrible snuff film that they make school children watch.
So we missed probably what ended up being about 10 minutes of the movie because they were still arresting Christ when we came in.
Yes, and that's how the movie starts because, again, if they had opened with the cleansing of the temple, the reason for his arrest, they would have been outed as hypocrites right off the bat.
Yes. Did you have any closing thoughts on the first 15 minutes of Nothing But the Hours? Do you want to give a review of that film?
We're gonna skip that.
No,
one.
you didn't like that one. That 100-year-old.
I wasn't in the mindset for it.
No, yeah.
But we went from one film that was subtitled in French. Oh yeah, also not translated at all. It was presented in its original format,
extremely
entirely in French. But we went from that to another film that's entirely subtitled.
Yes.
And that's something that's very interesting about this movie is that it is completely spoken in the languages that they would have been speaking at the time. So this film is entirely in Aramaic, Hebrew, and Latin.
Yes.
Which I'll tell you, I don't know any Aramaic and Hebrew, but because I'm pretentious, I know a lot of Latin.
I thought it was just,
but Latin's also very similar to Italian.
So maybe I'm just misinformed. I thought it was just because I know you've studied Italian for a while.
Yes,
I honestly thought that you
it.
just kind of sister or like root language rather.
It's pretty much like that. It's like the way Old English is to English, where you can understand a lot of it, but there are like some things that are like, what are they saying?
Yes.
You know, Latin is like Italian, but nouns are also conjugated.
Yes.
And that's annoying.
I don't know why I said yes. I don't have any knowledge base to agree or disagree with that.
But something you notice as you go into this movie is that this is a it's subtitled in English, and I think it's burned in subtitles too, because like there's a font for it.
Yes.
There's a font for it. It's not it's not like papyrus like it is in Avatar.
I was literally about to go to the papyrus in Avatar.
It's not like papyrus in Avatar, but it's definitely burned into it. But it is an attempt to be historically as accurate as possible, where they're speaking Hebrew when appropriate. They're speaking, all the Romans speak Latin. But something that is surprising, even though this is a film that is historically accurate, they actually use the correct pronunciation of Jesus's name as it would have been at the time, which is Yeshua. So Yeshua is Hebrew. It's like mostly related to Joshua. It's like the old version of the name Joshua. And that's what they called him in the movie. And that's not something I remembered. And that's really surprising that they went there, especially because like you don't hear the name Jesus spoken at all in this movie. And it's trying to be accurate, but like that's why people are there.
It's very odd that this movie was such a hit with the type of people who, and I'm allowed to stereotype them because I was raised by them, the type of people who, there's that boomer humor thing of kind of like intentionally mispronouncing things, you know, like because you think that's like like my mom, who, you're really taking a hit on this episode. Sorry, Mom. She used to like intentionally, when the word twerking kind of entered the lexicon, she used to be like, what is that you guys are doing, that tweaky? And it's not a joke. All you've done is add a different letter. Like you didn't, it's not like you're like calling it jerking because you guys are like that. That's a bad joke, but it is a joke. Mm-hmm. There's no premise to it.
Yes.
And it's very funny that this was a success primarily with the people who think that and saying Merca are the peak of comedy. It's weird for any movie subtitled, especially in multiple languages, one of which is dead.
Or spoken.
Yes.
Spoken in a dead language.
Yes. Subtitled in English, spoken, to be embraced commercially in the United States at all.
Yes.
Much less with this.
And in a movie where they don't even call him Jesus, but the subtitles do.
Yeah, I say this to say.
Do you know where that comes from, the name Jesus?
I actually don't know the origin.
So the origin is that for some reason, this Hebrew child who grew up this Hebrew child from Nazareth had a Greek name. Mm-hmm. So Jesus is actually the Greek name.
Oh, I think
they called him Jesus Christo. So Christ wasn't his last name. They didn't have last names back then. Christ just means Messiah. So it's just like, Jesus the Christ, which is why you can say Passion of the Christ. It's not like saying his last name. Yeah. That wasn't his last name. He didn't have one. They didn't have last names. He was just Jesus from Nazareth.
It's very funny. I don't know. It's just really funny to me seeing people who would like emphatically insist that Jesus was white. He is portrayed by.
He's played by a white man in this movie.
Let me double check here because I don't want Jim Caviezel to be in our mentions.
Oh yes, if he's white or if he's not. But the Romans would have actually. So in Hebrew, his name was Yeshua. The Romans would have called him Yesu or Yehovah. They would have called him, which is why the plaque on any Catholic depiction of Jesus will say INRI, which is Yesu Nazarenus Rex Judaeum. Something like that. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews.
If you're curious, as an addendum to that,
yes,
Jim Caviezel is quite white. His surname is Romanch, but his father is of Swiss and Slavic descent, while his mother is Irish. Oh, so maybe they saw something of themselves.
So he might be Orthodox. He might be Catholic. I don't know. But this is
the thing is that whatever information you look up with any guys who get famous in this space
for playing Jesus.
For playing Jesus, for being in this type of film, for appealing to this demographic, whether it be in film, whether it be in politics, whatever, whatever you look up about their religion, like their personal religious history, is going to be so muddled by revisionism because they need to maintain a brand that like you can find what he would tell a reporter he is now. You might have a harder time finding what he was when he was 20, you know, that's kind of the issue dealing with these guys. But anyway, we go into, and I just want to talk about the print real quick. We did see this on 35 millimeter on a like trashed print. There were moments
very loved, very appreciated, but not very well taken care of.
No, yeah, it's just really
seen a lot of times by a lot of scarred children.
Yeah, not preserved very well. But this, there were a couple moments where like there were whole scenes where there would be like a scratch line on the.
There were whole like it was the switch between every reel was beat to shit.
Yeah,
like every time there was a reel change, it was like completely destroyed.
And I don't know enough about projection to tell you what the letters were, what this means. There was one switch between reels where the image went away, and for like a frame or two, came up with like a test pattern with like 3 letters in between it.
Yes.
It was. I can't remember what they were right now. I'd have to look this up. But and it was kind of perfect for it because it felt like I was digging up an artifact of like my relationship to not so much movies, but like my relationship to like how I interact with like just like art and like dealing with things as either an obligation versus like something that I actually really want to go partake in.
That's clever.
Yes. Many of the films in this series were presented with kind of a satirical bent, kind of based off Mel Gibson's talking about this film. I think it's obviously meant to be taken really seriously.
It's an incredibly serious film. There's no point in this where you're going to be laughing.
Yes. But given
until you maybe, I don't know, realize the circular, you know, I'll talk about like, there are things I admire about the Gospels, but I do not look at them as a work of nonfiction.
Yes.
It is a story, especially the Gospels. It is a story about a carpenter who ends up nailed to a piece of wood. It is all about circular.
That's dramatic irony.
It is a lot of dramatic irony because it ends, you know, he gets arrested for whipping people and he gets whipped. It's like a lot of circular. It's all about the circles.
So, based on the way that it's presented to this audience here, based on the type of audience who is likely going to show up to a 9:30 p.m. the week before Christmas showing at a repertory art house theater,
that's calling it Jesus Christ !
Yes. Yeah. How did the audience react to this? Because I think that like the way they were presenting this is that this was going to be this kind of maximalist, like extravaganza. No one's laughing at this. Spitefully.
I would have expected that a lot of the people who had been there had seen this movie before. And maybe a lot of them were in the, you know, this movie's 20 years old now. So these are probably people who could have grown up with the movie like I did. These are people who have bad memories of this movie. No matter, you know, I watch this every year of Catholic school. So I went to Sunday school up until middle school. And in middle school, I started going to Catholic school. So in Catholic school, it's just like, we're going to spend the whole week watching you don't have that break. Mm-hmm. We watch Jesus of Nazareth and in like one entire day. Because like, 8 hours of school, you're just going to watch a 6.5 hour miniseries in one day. And then we're going to watch Passion of the Christ afterwards. Yes. We did that every year. You figure that would desensitize you. I had not watched this movie since 2009, 2008, 2008 was the last time I watched this movie. I was still unprepared. And I walked out of the movie and I told you, I'm like, that's the most violent movie I've ever seen. And I know there are bloodier and gorier movies, but I don't think there's anything more violent than this film.
So I'd love you to go into like, how do you delineate between something that is bloody and gory versus something that is more violent? Aside from, I would love to explain. Yeah. Please.
So the main difference is, John Wick, he'll kill 100 guys, but there is never a moment in those movies where they are focusing on the pain that person is going through. Yeah. This is 2 hours nearly nonstop of focusing on the pain that one guy is going through.
Yeah.
And when it does come to the violent and grotesque stuff, there's nothing that like is instantly killing this guy.
Yeah.
By this guy, I mean the Christ.
Yes. It's really, it's
a lot of focusing on the painful elements of Jesus. When you know, I've said before, you should talk about his teachings, but this is all just focused on the pain.
That's the thing, is this movie contains virtually none of the things that made Christ appealing to the people in his time or to his present day followers.
Well, it does. And we could talk about like what this movie also, I think, fails to do is, I don't know who's watching this movie who doesn't already know the story, but a big fault of this movie, and I don't know how you could even rectify this. They don't explain shit in this movie. They have people on screen. They don't name them. Like, I don't think they ever say Pontius Pilate's name.
No, you just kind of have
to know who is who. You have to know the story. And like, they'll throw up, there's a singular shot in the movie of Jesus on the back of a donkey, and there are waving palm leaves on him. And if you didn't grow up in the church, you have no fucking idea why that shot is in there.
The thing is, because I don't think that it's intended to be watched by anybody who is not raised or being raised
also,
in the church.
I don't know who's going to that movie. Well, yeah, that's the thing too, is like, you're going to know the story, but they also don't explain any of this. But also, if they do, you're kind of talking down to your audience who most likely already knows these stories.
Yes.
But where you're losing is, you know, this movie's not going to convert anybody. This is a disgusting, horrible film.
No. So it makes you wonder, if it's not trying to convert anybody, I don't think it really is like trying to retain anybody, because I don't think anybody would see this and say, wow, I'd love. So what is the purpose of this movie?
I think it's the guilt aspect of it. Growing up in a Catholic church is a lot of guilt. I've once heard the Catholic Church described as, you're born canceled and you spend your whole life trying to walk it back.
I don't think I've heard that. I don't think that's
kind of funny.
It's kind
of funny.
It works.
Yeah.
I catch your meaning.
The Catholic Church is the one that says like, you're born in sin and you have to be baptized right away. So you're baptized as a baby. So you're not even like, the reason why they have confirmation in the Catholic Church is, you know, you're brought into the church and you're sent through the sacraments before you're old enough to make the decisions. But yeah, 13, you're old enough to sign your soul away. You're literally signing paperwork to say you're a Catholic forever, which I have signed that paperwork, and I haven't been to church in over 10 years.
Now you have to go to hell. That sucks.
Yeah. Well, no, that's not true. Christians believe in hell, which is also funny.
Catholics
because
don't?
No, Catholics do.
Catholics
definitely believe in hell.
Shit.
They love it.
There's no way.
Most of their thoughts about hell are about Dante's Inferno, which is from 800 years after the Bible was written.
Yes. I wonder what people were like.
Also, Pontius Pilate is a character in the Inferno, if you've ever read it.
I read
he's in it very
I've read
briefly.
Inferno. I haven't read the rest of the
It's the one worth reading because I
feel like Purgatorio has got to be a boring ass read, because it's like, okay, well, nothing's happening.
Yes.
And then you get to Paradiso and you're like, well,
let's talk about that real quick, because we were talking about before the movie started that there was going to be a sequel to Passion of the Christ.
Yes. Well,
or is it in production?
We'll touch on that towards the end here.
Okay, sure.
But so I kind of want to talk about, because we're talking about this movie now, after we've already had a longstanding relationship with it. After you, like you said, many people probably already, nobody is like, I don't think there's a single person in that audience thinking, you know, that's such a popular movie, I've never seen it, I'd love to go try it.
Yeah. No one was there for the first time.
Yeah. No way. This is more likely, but I feel like is definitely not true, especially in the context of the showing here. I don't think there's anybody who was like, oh, I loved watching that as a kid. I don't think anybody, I don't think that is going to be anybody. I think it's all people who like are maybe going to see to reclaim it in some way where they can, I kind of had like, I don't know if I said this to you afterwards, but I was like, he's not so big after all. Like, my attitude towards the movie was like, okay, well, you're not so scary now, are you? It was a
reclaiming moment for you, wasn't it?
It was, because I was like, this was this thing that I just couldn't even engage with. Obviously, because I was at an age where I should not have been asked to engage with it.
Yes.
Coming back to it, and with more knowledge of film now, being able to kind of look down on it in this incredibly superficial way of like we've talked about, like you talk about gorier films. You talk about like the Terrifier movies, something. I'm like, I've seen grosser. I don't. Yeah. This is like, I know what you mean.
I would say, as a fan of the Terrifier movies, those are movies I enjoy. I love the craft of it.
Yeah,
they're grotesque, they're horrible, but there's no point in those movies where, okay, maybe like that one part in the second one, but there's really no points in that movies where I feel the revulsion that I do when I watch Passion.
That movie,
'cause I think it's an interesting counterpoint actually to
Yes.
this, because you don't feel revulsion in that movie. I don't necessarily think that this is director's intent.
Mhm.
I feel exhaustion with that movie.
With Terrifier?
Terrifier 2.
Terrifier 2,
There's-
It's
there
too
is-
long. You're right. It is too long.
It is an unforgivable 2 hours and 18 minutes. It's a
Wow.
slasher movie. It
Yeah.
should not be that long. There is a really prolonged kill sequence in a bedroom. I know you know exactly
That's the one
what
we're
I'm
talking
talking
That's the one I'm
about.
talking about. It's the
That
only
it-
time I'm like, oh,
it
that's
gets-
too much.
It gets to a point where I'm no longer scared.
Mhm.
I'm no longer even kind of like turning my eyes away in disgust. I am truly at a point where I'm just watching so much degradation and torture of a human being
Mhm.
that I literally in the theater, I'm just like, ugh, come on. I know, well,
Yeah.
you're going to do more stuff. I don't want to give it away because that sequence is worth watching. That movie is worth watching.
The whole movie's
That
worth
sequence
watching.
is worth watching.
The first
because
one too.
It's just really, it's very inventive kills if you like slashers and you know, it's like that movie has this really intense aesthetic of just everything is shit, everything is ruined,
And
everything is kind
entire
of
thing
rusted
is pink
out
and blue,
and it's
too.
broken
Yeah.
and it's broken concrete. It's not color corrected very
It's
well.
a very poorly graded film.
It is. I would argue.
The third one, I saw the trailer for it, looks really good.
Yes, I think the director, and I'm really glad we're touching on Damien Leone responding to criticisms of Terrifier 2 when shooting Terrifier 3 on our Passion of the Christ episode.
Yes.
It really feels like he has taken a lot of the criticisms in good faith
Mhm.
to heart and is like, I got it. Shorter runtime. Maybe we pay a little bit more attention to the cinematography. But I have no idea at this point how I even got to Terrifier.
Do you want to talk about how Mel Gibson took criticism of this film?
I actually don't.
How much criticism was there of this film? At least at the
There's
time.
the usual stuff. I think even at this point, because this is post arrest, right?
I don't know the timeline of when the arrest happened.
Here,
Yeah.
when I'll throw you off on a thing here.
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts on any sort of attempt to reclaim this thing as an object for us instead of for its intended audience? I guess we are its intended audience, but like people who have self-selectedly removed themselves from the audience.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that was the thing was, you know, I would compare this, and I've brought it up, Jesus of Nazareth, several times. It actually might be worth bringing up that IMDb page because I forget the actor who's in it, but like in my head, when I hear the name Jesus, because that's always a movie I watched so many times, that's the actor who I see in my head, and that's the face that I see. And it's like, if you've ever seen Jesus of Nazareth, you look this up, you see that actor, he's like, oh my God, that dude looks exactly like every Renaissance painting I've ever seen. They had like the perfect cast guy. I would rather watch the 6.5 hour of Jesus's teachings than the 2 hours of torture.
He was a smart guy. He knew, he had his head on right.
But that's the other thing is like they only touch on it. There's a very brief scene where you see him washing his disciples' feet, and it's just thrown in. You have no idea why he's doing that, what that means.
The thing is that because Gibson is in a position where he has to portray that, he can't portray that as shoe leather because it is quite literally sacred to the people he's selling this movie to.
Yes.
So when he shows him interacting with one of his disciples in a loving, teaching way, he has no choice but to actually treat that as sacred. It is kind of like really some like wonderful respite from the horrible stuff that's going on immediately before and afterwards.
Yes.
And a reminder, I'm like, oh, it's kind of crazy because I don't think it's really meant to be the scene in the movie that kind of really takes your breath away. But it is the one that I'm like, I really get why
it feels like it's
someone
a break.
would follow this guy.
It only just feels like it's a break though.
Yes.
Whenever you throw a scene like that, it's just like, we need a break from this. I actually found a good note for myself because when we had watched the movie, we were trying to figure out what the genre of this film is.
Yes.
I have a really bad take on what kind of I have a really bad take on what kind of genre this movie is. And I want to know what you think. Is this an exploitation film?
I think exploitation is the closest you're going to get, unless you would call propaganda a genre, which I think you could.
You could. It's definitely propaganda. But if you want to say exploitation, we talked about why you were exploiting the church here, because you are not supposed to be doing this. In fact, there's actually a lot of arguments. That's the main thing that separates, well, not really the main thing, but it's one of the main things that separates the different Christian churches is how and when you're supposed to depict Jesus. So you go into any Catholic church, you're going to see a statue of Jesus nailed to a cross. You're going to see stained glass windows with depictions of things from his life. You go into most Protestant Lutheran churches and you will see pretty scenery. You will see a cross, but you will not see a Jesus on it because, it's literally the first commandment is to not make false idols.
Yeah. So I guess on the false idolatry meter,
I mean, Catholics have saints.
Exactly.
That's
like
the other thing.
What is the most offensive thing you can make that isn't a false idol? Versus what's the least offensive thing that still breaks that commandment?
I think making a film where you portray your God as a victim is pretty bad.
Yeah.
And that's pretty exploitive because he does not feel like the hero of this film. He feels like the victim of this film. This entire thing feels like a second act.
And the implication is that you're the aggressor because you sinned.
Because you did this to him. Yes.
Yeah. This is all happening because of like the first act of this movie is your life up until you sat down to watch the movie. And then this happening to him because, you took a cookie from those are the petty sins that are applying to a lot of the people that had to watch this. Is like you hit your sister or you like.
Did you ever have to do penance growing up?
Penance is this? I think this is a Catholic.
It is a Catholic thing. Yeah.
Catholic.
You said
Catholic.
Cataholic.
Cataholic. That's what you are now.
I am a cataholic.
You switched from
I love my
Catholicism
cat.
to
I love my
cat's alcoholism, I guess, following the
shout out to Noodle.
Shout out to Noodle.
Noodle's my cat. He's the best.
And is your God now, I think. Yeah. Is like the closest to a God that
so let's talk about penance. So if you're Catholic, you're supposed to do it like as often as you possibly can, because if you have unconfessed sins, you go to hell. Which is why if you are Catholic, one of the things you can get is last rites on your deathbed. You can call a priest and they will do your confession right. They'll anoint you with oil and it's supposed to be your last sacrament.
Yeah.
It's actually impossible to do all 7 sacraments in your lifetime because one of the sacraments is become a priest and another one is become married. And you can't do both. So the most you can do is 6.
Wait, no. I think there actually is a way around this. I believe, because I looked into this, I think if you're a married person and you suffer a great personal tragedy, like say your wife dies and your children die, and you're like, I have nothing but my devotion.
You're
to
right,
Christ,
because
I believe you can. So all you have to do is have your wife and children die. I don't think that you are allowed to murder them and then become a priest.
No, definitely not. But you can go to heaven on paper if you confess that you murdered somebody.
Yeah. So I guess if you get married, murder your wife, you get that sacrament, murder your wife, then say, sorry, I murdered my wife, go to jail for it, go to divinity school while you're in prison. I believe you can be a 7 sacrament person.
Maybe.
If you do that.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody wants to try that out.
I've done all the Nick Cage movies. I'm not doing all the sacraments.
Don't do the 7 sacraments after this. Please don't kill your wife. I wouldn't like that. I just want to say I looked this up a while ago now.
I'm glad you looked that up.
Mel Gibson was arrested for a DUI in 2006.
It was 2006.
2 years after this.
After this.
Yeah. So that puts a different...
I don't know. They may not have let him make this movie if that had just happened right beforehand.
Well, no, because I mean, this story...
Not that it was a secret. Not that his feelings were a secret.
No, because he had said stuff. There are reports of like other people who had been on set say he said this to me. I think he's the type of guy who is just kind of like outside of, having, being a bigot in some places. Also, it's just kind of an asshole to be around. So like him just being a difficult person to work around, that reputation existed. So I think for him to adapt a story that has been used to justify over many thousands of years, to justify anti-Semitism, because that's kind of the thing is that this story implies that it's, it's this great wrongdoing of the Jewish people.
And that's something I want to talk about real quick is while we have the horrible depiction of the Pharisees in this film, it almost feels like there is Pontius Pilate apologia in this film, where he is not at all portrayed as a bad guy at all. He's like, my hands are tied, I have to do this kind of thing. And yes, very famously in the Bible, he does like, he's like, I wash my hands of this. But like, he's still the person who sentenced God to death.
It is,
and he is not portrayed as a villain.
There are scenes that have nothing to do with Christ, that are just him, Pontius Pilate, the man who ultimately decided it's fine, you can execute and torture Jesus, talking to his wife about how he feels bad that he's being put in the position that he has to do this.
Yeah.
It is bizarrely sympathetic
Pontius
to him.
Pilate, by the way, is one of the few people who's few real people who is specifically mentioned in Dante's Inferno.
Yeah.
Dante's Inferno, he specifically writes that Pontius Pilate is in hell. I do not remember which circle of hell he is in. I do know that Judas, who is also portrayed in this film, is one of the very few people who's
like 3 people.
Treachery, I think, is the very deepest pit of
Treachery is
hell.
the deepest one, and you're chewed on by Satan forever.
You're there with Lucifer in a frozen lake.
Yes.
It's a frozen lake. So it is cold at the very bottom of hell. I don't know if that's where the term cold as hell comes from, or if cold as hell comes from Norse mythology, where it's actually snowing all the time in hell.
I think it's just like as hell.
Which is where the name hell comes from, because it's called Inferno. Oh, this is fun. You want to learn some Latin? Okay. Inferno. Inferno is like a word for pain, suffering, damnation.
Yeah.
It doesn't directly mean hell, because like
I thought
hell,
it meant fire.
No, Inferno has nothing to do with fire.
Oh, okay.
Inferno is just pain and suffering, because most of hell is not fire. Like violence, I think, is hot, and one of the other ones is like a lake of flames. Maybe it's just violence. I don't know. But a lot of it is just like lust is just like windstorms everywhere. Whatever. I don't need to go into Dante's Inferno. But what I want to talk about is Inferno means.
I'm glad you decided that.
No, this is important. This is important.
We've done a couple minute deep dive.
This is important. So Inferno means like pain, suffering, whatever. But the word disco means I learn. So Disco Inferno means I learned through pain and suffering. So that's what Disco Inferno means.
That's nice. I'm glad we have a Latin expert here. I don't know. I just truly wasn't expecting Disco Inferno to be where you'd go from Dante's Inferno. I don't know why you changed one word. It is a thought. It's a good thought. I just didn't expect it to happen. Kind of going back to the intentionality of you and me specifically, like aside from the other people in the audience who I think we've kind of covered, we're not really reactive to the weirdly.
No, I would say half the movie people are watching that with their mouths open. It was it's shocking.
People are kind of rapt by this movie. I was one of them. It is it is in that car crash way. And again, because it is a really well-made movie by a talented filmmaker, with a lot of resources at his disposal.
Yeah. It's a well shot, and it's a very effective film.
This is a movie that is difficult to look away from. In where it should be a movie that is difficult to look at. When I pitched this to you originally, just because I knew you had, a religious upbringing, I took a gamble on the fact that you had a pre-existing relationship with this movie based on our shared, religious upbringing. As far as like any effort to reclaim this for myself, to take any sort of like power over, I don't think I could reclaim this in a way where this would become like a midnight movie, where I would go and I'd laugh at it and throw popcorn at the screen, because that feels like, even as somebody who these things are no longer sacred for, that just feels they're beating the shit out of the guy. I don't want to go do that.
They were being really mean to him. They're being really mean to Jesus.
They really kicked the shit out of Jesus.
But this is also not a movie you could put on in the background. This is not a real background.
Like movie. If you put that on in the background, that is a quick way to clear out a party.
Yeah, I think so.
There's the old story about Carrie Fisher. Whenever she needed to clear out a party, she would put on the Star Wars Holiday Special. People would be so off put, they would just be like, "This is a weird vibe," and start leaving. I think this could.
I'm jealous she had a copy of it.
This could more efficiently clear people out of a room. I think they would see it and be actually, like you said, revulsed by what's going on. And if you have not been locked into the movie for, all the runtime except for the beginning 10 minutes, which really don't matter that much anyway, then I think, you would be really put off by this. But that's the thing is, I have and not that I think that this is any real sincere effort. I think this showing is it represents an isolated attempt at this thing. The way the description talks about it, I think is not, I think is just an idea of how to engage with this movie, right? Is saying like, this is a thing that like, what if we treated this like the action blockbuster that it played as? Because I want to talk a little bit about, we walked out, we talked a little bit about this on our way home afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, you and I said, I think the best scene in this is the whipping scene.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with you. It is the best.
It's the best.
It's the best made. It's the scene that most effectively communicates the idea that is clear in the intention.
Yes. And this is where coming in and knowing a little bit of Latin actually helps you learn a little bit more about it. As this scene feels like it goes on fucking forever. Where they start with the rods, and then they move to like this horrible like metal torture like device with hooks on it. They start whipping them on, and that's the worst.
Is that the Cat of Nine Tails?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what
it's
it's
glass.
Called. It's glass.
It's bits. It's shards of glass.
And it's just like you're watching this, and there are close-up shots of his skin tearing off, and they're like whipping him to the point, they're whipping him. They're not really cutting away too much. They're just showing the
Once
violence.
in a blue moon, you'll see.
But then you see Mary, and you see Mary's reaction when we see that she starts crying, and the audio of what's happening starts going out, and you get her perspective. You're like, yeah, obviously it's a really horrible thing. That's how we feel watching this. But I want to talk about my favorite thing about this is something you can only get if you know a little bit of Latin.
Mm-hmm.
When it cuts back, when the audio comes back, and you start hearing the count, when they're counting the amount of times they're whipping him,
is it 40
it's
lashes?
16. They say 16 out of 40. So you're like, and they show all 40 of them, but it feels like you've been watching this for an hour, and the next number you hear is 16. And it's like, I that's something I remembered from growing up, was like, I remember him saying 16, but like, I was also counting it too, like what you could hear. And it's like, yeah, they don't skip any. It just feels like you've been watching it that long.
It is unrelenting. It's the sort of thing that I think they would defend. It's like, well, it's got to be accurate. And we have to
show all 40 of those lashes.
That's actually, that point is, I think, why this is an interesting, this movie has an interesting relationship to like escapism and feelings of being represented in a media where, there's a lot of kind of like, stick with me here.
Okay.
So you see this movie as kind of a way to, I mean, we talked a lot about genre here.
Yes.
It's pornography of a sort.
Yeah. I'll know when I see it.
Yeah. Exactly. It's this really masturbatory idea, really common in media targeted at American Christians, which is that even though all of the data points suggest that you are on top, you are the dominant people in society.
Yes.
Everyone lives by your rules. We measure years since the death of Christ, since the events portrayed in this movie.
Since the birth of Christ.
Yes. I'm sorry. Yes. Since he's 32 when he dies, I think.
Yeah. So it's 32 AD about.
And this is a very difficult thing to kind of express, but like,
oh, I'm ready.
The way that this movie is a way for people to kind of get off on that feeling, the idea that we're actually the victims, even though all real life evidence implies that we're not, is kind of really similar to the way that you'll watch an action movie and feel like, wow, this idea is feeling less developed than it felt a second ago. But the idea that you can watch an action movie and kind of escape to a reality that also doesn't really exist. I don't know. This is a weird.
No, you're on a good point here, because I touched on it before. A lot of Christianity, and I will call it bad faith Christianity, because there are things that I admire about it. I'm not a religious person myself, but I will say that there are things I admire about Christianity. Bad faith Christianity is guilt for the kids, and it's persecution for the adults. And that's what it is. It's that feeling of persecution that is what they're feeding off of. And part of the reason that this movie exists in the first place is because of the idea of persecution. And if you want to talk about, like representation in media, it's like, this is not even close to the first film that's based on a Christian holiday. Like, how many Christmas films are there?
Yes.
The fact that like Christmas is also a national holiday too is also like another thing too. Oh, good question. Here's a quick question for you. Who do you think has more songs written about them? Jesus or Santa?
See, the thing, songs I'm going to be aware of,
Yeah.
Santa.
I actually have looked this up. Jesus has 10 times as many songs.
That's what I'm going to say, because I'm like, because you have to count hymns and stuff, right? There's no way.
Closely followed by Gwyneth Paltrow.
Gwyneth Paltrow is third behind Jesus.
No, I have
and
no
Santa?
idea.
Oh, okay.
Because every Coldplay song is about her.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know. So to kind of like unmuddy a little bit, I think that weirdly, the idea of treating a movie like this as, and maybe this is speaking to the appeal of the thing, right?
Yes.
Is even though the movie is guilting you and making you feel bad that this is your fault, the fact that this is the person you follow and something this bad happened to him kind of allows you to victimize yourself. And it's escapism. It's escapism to an alternate reality where you, as a white Christian American, get to falsely identify with somebody who was one out of those three things.
Oh,
I guess Jesus isn't a Christian.
No, he was
Jewish.
He
was,
they actually have someone who is considered the first Christian in this movie. We will talk about that character soon because there's another character that's not named. No one gets their name said. You just have to know who these people are. But we'll get to that.
But you get to identify with somebody who has been falsely portrayed as having the same traits as you, and you get to see them suffering and simultaneously get to say, oh, he's just like me FR. Like you
that's literally me film. You put Jim Caviezel as Jesus Christ right next to every film that Ryan Gosling is in.
Yes. Yeah. So, and in that way, I think that like, yeah, it's a lot of the way that we kind of look at escapism in media a little bit. Ryan Gosling's actually the best example of it.
You actually do have a really great point about this. Is like, yeah, that's probably why the torture thing is there. It's like, this is how it feels to be a Catholic these days.
Yeah,
that's what it is. That's what people are going to say. Wow.
It is presenting the thing that we have seen old Christian people mirror ever since then is they're out to get us. It doesn't even matter who the there is.
It's not even since then. It was before that.
Yeah,
too.
That's the thing. And then you're saying it's always been like this.
That, yeah.
And you can kind of revisionist history pretend like you haven't been calling the shots the entire time yourself. Mm-hmm. I think and I'm like working this out in real time. I think that's might be what I find the grossest thing about this movie.
Yeah.
Is that you're being guilted into being told this horrible thing is your fault. But the much more insidious thing far below that surface is them saying, this is justification for you to act with righteous fury because you are a victim, because this, by happening to him, transitive property happened to you.
This is because you watched hentai.
Yes. Interesting that you would bring that up as an example of a sin. I would bring
speaking of Japanese animation, let's get into
let's
get into this topic.
Right,
I know in a previous episode you talked about Evangelion.
Yes, we did.
A lot of Christian themes in that one. Something that you may have recognized, and you would not recognize because this is not something they say in the film. There's a soldier in the film, the Roman soldier who in history was the one who stabbed Jesus with the spear, which is what ultimately, which is after he died.
To verify that he was dead. Yes.
That soldier's name was Longinus. So Longinus, and if you watch Evangelion, they have the spear of Longinus.
Yes.
And that is just found in like this horrible monster. I don't remember what the context is, but I know there's this horrible monster. There's like a spear in it, and it's just like But they have the spear of Longinus, and that's where that name comes from. Longinus is considered the first Christian, also.
He was the first one who was like, I buy this?
He was the one who was like the first person to convert to Christianity. It's like there's a whole feast about him and everything.
No one who watched it was like, all he did was tell us to share. Like nobody in the crowd converted before this guy who had to stab him.
They certainly did. It's more so that a miracle is like I don't know. It was one of those horrible Romans that became, but I don't know. There's a whole feast about him and everything. I think he's also the one that holds up the sponge to Jesus when he's on the cross as well. I think it's also that
he puts it on a spear.
And
it's at least, I don't know if this is actually how it's described.
No, in the Bible it was a can of spinach.
Yes, was it actually?
Yeah, it was a can of spinach,
okay,
and
they didn't.
And they played.
That's the most embarrassing. Wait, actually, I think I've ever had.
No. Yeah.
Was that is the most embarrassed I've ever been by asking that question. All right. Well. Great. I'm excited to have you back.
I couldn't tell you if that was in the book or not, but there are certain things that they changed here and there, but there are also 4 tellings of most stories. And
Yes.
of course, that being one of the most important events of the entire story, that is told 4 times.
Yes.
So it's slightly different every time, but the gist is there.
We've touched on this a little bit.
Yes.
And I don't think we're going to walk away with a definitive answer to this question, but I think it's worth giving some time to itself. We talk about what genre is this movie?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask, what is it that kills you when you're on a cross?
What
Because
is it
that's
that
something we don't know. Did you know that?
I assume it's just like death by like exhaustion after a certain point, right?
You like die of thirst.
Yeah, you'd
essentially.
have to crucify a guy to find out. I mean,
Jesus
really
died
want to do that.
Jesus bled out. He bled out, but like for the most part, it's you die of like thirst. And more Latin for you. The term excruciating means from the cross.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I saw the movie. It didn't look fun.
Nah.
I guess you would bleed, but like I always thought like when they put it through the hands and the feet,
an infection. You die from infection.
There's not like big blood vessels there, so you wouldn't bleed from that wound.
No.
Obviously, like it would bleed a fair because it's a big gaping, like wound. But so I guess it's more an easier way to narrow this down to say what isn't this. I think we can both agree, despite the fact that it is presented as one, this is not an action movie.
It's not an action film. It's not an educational film.
It's not education.
It is told as a historical event, but it's not like what you should be teaching.
It's weirdly plotless. Like you said, it's there are these long scenes of Pontius being told by his wife that he's not that bad a guy. There are long scenes of Pharisees shouting at people that this shall not pass or whatever. Yes. But most of it is just like it's like these like the mandatory minimum length scene to say this is why we should be allowed to move him to this court and beat the shit out of him there. Yeah. And then it's a much longer sequence of him getting the shit kicked out of him.
It's the shit kicked out of him and then brought back. It's like, you didn't do enough. Crucify him.
So all that being said, is it a horror movie? There are horror movies that are structured like this, but even a Saw movie has more plot to it. Well,
that's the whole intent of this is the lack of plot. It is entirely about Good Friday rather than, there are a couple, you have, The Last Supper is mentioned in here. You have Palm Sunday is mentioned in here. I don't believe they ever mention Christmas, but like, when are you going to do that? They don't touch on most of the teachings. And Easter, literally the most important holiday in the Christian faith. The reason why the Christian faith exists. Everyone has died. One dude came back. That's why that's his biggest miracle is he came back to life. That is spoilers. The last 30 seconds of this film is Jesus waking up in the cave.
It's really crazy. There's no like Sermon on the Mount before the Ascension. It's really crazy. I'm like, that feels like
there's none of that. There's no Pentecost, which is the 50 days after.
That feels like a slam dunk. Enjoy, like victory lap, enjoy it. Everyone's going to be happy.
Can we touch on the sequel and why that's not going to happen in the sequel, or you want to come back to that?
We'll come back to the sequel. Okay. I'd kind of like to deal with the sequel like right at the very end.
Sure.
Here. But I want to talk a little bit more about because we've talked about the movie's like quite well crafted. It's shot really well.
Beautifully shot movie.
It's directed well.
Yeah.
Would you say there is a good performance in this movie?
I couldn't tell you because I think they're all effective performances. I do think Jim Caviezel, he just looks like Jesus. I don't think he's that great, but he's also he also barely has any lines. It's mostly just
because the movie
him in pain for the most.
Because the movie wants to make Jesus a more dynamic figure. When it does focus on his teachings, it's him. It's kind of whenever Jesus claps back at somebody is the only time you ever actually see him espousing opinions. Like, what you've done here is wrong. And it's supposed to be, we're supposed to triumphantly
and not
agree
even
with,
the selling goods in the church one.
We're supposed to triumphantly agree with him. That's what the movie wants from us. And what you mostly get is that in every time he's talking, it mostly just kind of makes him look like an arrogant dick. I know that's crazy to say about Christ.
They have the
there's no
let he who is without sin throw the first stone thing in there. But that's you have no context about that. I think you just have that scene. That was in there,
there's
right?
that scene with the crowd basically like screaming, for his blood. And Pontius keeps being like, I don't think, do we have to crucify him, guys?
Yeah.
And every time he turns back to Jesus and he's like, can you just like say you're sorry or something? I like just say you're not God. And his like refusal is not, he doesn't look like proud.
Mm-hmm.
He looks like arrogant. It's very weird. And I think it's just kind of something about Jim Caviezel himself.
Counterpoint.
Okay.
Not in the film, but one of the best clapbacks Jesus ever had.
Sure.
And it's one of my favorite.
We're going to also be publishing Jesus Christ top 10 clapbacks.
Yes.
And
this is definitely top. This is top 5. This one.
Yes, this is top 5 Jesus
great
clapbacks.
One. He says, before Abraham was, I am. And it's not a mistranslation. That's just kind of awesome.
Yeah. But that's the thing is like, if you see that in isolation without having the context, you have the foot washing scene and that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
You don't see him really being nice to like kids. You don't see I don't think you see the fishes and loaves.
Yeah, Jesus, he was good to animals. He washed behind his ears. Pretty good guy.
You don't see the fishes and loaves, I don't think, right?
No, that's not in the movie.
That's not in the movie.
Not in the movie. Water into wine's not in the movie. Walking on water's not in it.
You're making a Jesus movie and you don't put walking on water is crazy.
Yeah.
That's especially because this, you'd be like, oh, it doesn't fit into the story. This is similar to Oppenheimer. This is about a very small sliver of a man's life. It tells not the whole life, but it tries to talk about the whole life by telling this section.
Yeah.
But similar
there's no healing the sick. There's one where I forget which of his disciple has an ear cut off and he puts the ear back on. That's the only thing he does. Doesn't raise Lazarus from the dead. He doesn't heal the sick. Doesn't restore anyone's vision. None of that is in the movie.
These are big ass miracles.
Yeah.
It shows that
and this movie only very barely at the last 30 seconds is his biggest miracle.
Yes, the bare minimum, kind of talking about the absolute bare minimum, talking about like what they actually have to get through the story.
Yes.
And you can tell that Mel Gibson's intent is not actually to talk about. It's not to celebrate the accomplishments of Jesus Christ,
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, it's very telling that none of that stuff is there because it says the quiet part out loud by omitting that. It makes it all about the kind of nastiness of the thing and promoting the guilt of the thing. Jim Caviezel, it's like you said, it's very hard to judge. I think I come down on the side of, I don't think this is a good performance.
I think because there's direction.
There's no opportunity for him to be a good performer.
It's a lot of him. Yeah, I don't know. It's just a lot of like agony. That's the whole movie.
He can't overplay it because he doesn't want to trivialize it.
Yeah.
He has to have dignity in an undignified
Oh my
situation.
God. Did you imagine a movie that's just like Jesus screaming for 2 hours?
Yeah, we watched that.
No, he's not screaming for 2 hours. It's just a lot of like him going, ugh, ooh.
Yeah, it's kind of
a lot of that.
It's kind of got that like action movie tough guy thing to it. It's like, well, we have to like, it's very weird the figure that Jesus has become because the idea of him is that he's supposed to be really meek and unpretentious and not a proud person at all. He just believes really strongly in what he does. And this movie kind of turns him into a badass a little bit.
I was actually surprised that he doesn't have defined abs in the film. That was actually something I thought I remembered there being in there.
That was always the case.
Yeah.
I keep going back to the programming description. They referred to him as like sexy naked Jesus or something.
That's Willem Dafoe.
Yeah, I don't think that's the exact wording.
That's Willem Dafoe.
It's very close to that. So I think that's the thing is like I don't like Pontius. I don't like that. I don't really.
Pontius Pilate?
I think he's a bad dude.
This movie's kind of a fan of him, surprisingly.
Yeah, I don't think the performance is really anything special. Isabella Rossellini is in this movie.
Maybe do you think they did that because the Italians would have been mad? You made Pontius Pilate look bad.
Kind of like the Columbus Day thing.
You think it's like
where they're like, you can't. I mean, I can't.
You would have upset a lot of Catholics, maybe, but like Catholics, they don't like.
They're like, he's important.
Notably, you don't like Pontius Pilate. He's not a good guy.
Yeah,
he's kind of one of the major villains of the whole story.
Yes. So Yeah, I don't know. That is the one aspect of it that I think on a craft level is bad. I think this is a quite poorly acted movie with the asterisk of what option do they have? I also, by the way, I said Isabella Rossellini is in this movie. I meant to say, shit.
Have I
forgotten her name?
I can't name any of the actors in this besides Jim Caviezel. And Jim Caviezel, we could talk about like what he's been up to lately.
I meant to say Monica Bellucci.
And
mixed her up with a different former model turned actress. Monica Bellucci is in this playing Mary Magdalene.
Yeah. Also, you just need to know that because she's not named.
She's never named.
I think the only disciple that's directly named in this is Simon. Oh, Judas is directly named as well.
I thought Peter is the one who refuses.
See, I fucked up.
Did you know I Catholic
No. Because I went back. So here's the story behind Peter. Peter is very important. Peter's the very first pope. He's the most important apostle. The problem with that is if you've actually read the Bible, it's really fucking confusing because when he first shows up, his name is Simon. And Jesus in the most Sigma Alpha Chad
now you're
move.
making Jesus a badass.
No. In the most Sigma like Chad move imaginable, this dude Simon shows up and Jesus is just like, your name is Peter now. And he calls him Peter the rest of the book. And then the narrators start calling him Peter.
Yeah.
So like he does show up as Simon and like once or twice they call him Simon Peter, but like Jesus had a follower show up to him, which by the way was like the first one who wasn't like his brother.
Yeah.
Like most of them like James and there's another one named Simon were his brothers. Jesus is one of like 8 children. He was just the firstborn.
Yeah.
And that was like kind of significant, his birth, but
you're Pete. You're Pete now.
You're Pete. Yeah, well, I'm going to call you you're Peter now. He changed his name.
Yeah, I just don't. I also wanted to talk on this a little bit because we got to it a little bit earlier that we kind of passed over it.
Yes.
I think we can both agree the act of making this film, because it is a for-profit, like commercially released film, is blasphemous. I think that we like have to categorize this as I'm like this. The act of making this movie is an unchristian action.
I would definitely agree. So,
this does not invent American Christian entertainment. I would argue it kind of represents a like breaking of the dam that leads to it having the potential to be mainstream entertainment. Like you said, like
you would never have had God's Not Dead if it weren't for this film.
Yeah. I think 4 film series now.
We're 4 films.
Yeah. We're going to be doing the God's Not Dead quadrilogy next week with Alex Campo, by the way.
I'm down for that.
Yeah, I've actually never seen any of those. I think because I looked at them and was immediately.
You want to talk the persecution? That's like the entire film of persecution.
Yeah.
The entire film series about persecution.
Well, those make the subtext here text.
There's no subtext.
That's the thing. Is that it is literally just, I believe, Kirk Cameron walking into rooms and saying, "You're persecuting me because I'm Christian."
Oh, Kirk Cameron's not in the films, but
I thought he was in them.
David A.R. White is in them, and he's also the director. David A.R. White is most famous for if you've ever seen that YouTube clip. He's most famous for that YouTube clip where he was still like a teenager, where he looks right into the camera and goes, "Jesus, man." That was him.
I think I know the answer to this. In your travels, does any of this sort of thing ever have any artistic merit?
Any of the Christian films?
Any like anything that is marketed in this way towards Christians? I'm like really stretching my brain. I feel like VeggieTales is kind of anodyne in a way that
actually, you know what? Surprisingly, I went and
I don't mind
I looked at a little bit of VeggieTales as like a reference point for this.
Sure.
It's like that was another thing I watched when I was young. Shockingly anti-Semitic at points.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Shockingly.
I don't remember that. What about it?
What about it?
I genuinely don't remember much of it.
No, it's like, because like it is all like a retelling of Bible stories kind of thing. And, Pharisees are often the villains in a lot of Bible stories. Yeah. Still not, it's just not great. I found this one clip that.
Do they have a retelling of Passion?
That would be really funny if they did.
They were mostly like, I feel like when it comes to Bibles, it's Old Testament stuff because that's like, and Daniel learned a lesson about being king. Like that's generally how it goes.
Samson learned to stop going to that barber.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like there are a lot there. there are things that like after you turn off the VeggieTales episode, you can turn to your Sunday school class and say,
and Solomon said,
yeah.
Oh, and Solomon said, let's cut that baby in half.
That one was like weirdly in the rotation in a way that I was like,
Yeah.
the rest of these are like about like fucking coats of many colors. I don't think that like the baby cut in half one, maybe we should put that in the Jesus pile for when you go to like youth group in a couple of years. I don't think we're quite ready for that just yet. I just have to ask this about this. These are movies that like you and I are talking about a movie that we, like I said, we have self removed ourselves from the pool of people this movie is targeting. Does that mean that we should stop criticizing this movie for not being what we want it to be because we don't want it to exist at all? Is this a case of, I'm going to make a bad faith argument against myself here. Is this a case of let people enjoy things? Is this the sort of thing that we should just be fine with existing and let the people who want to consume it consume it?
I think the target audience doesn't enjoy this movie. The point is not to enjoy this movie.
But I think, as I went into earlier, on a subconscious level, I think they do. I think they get off on it. I think the way that people consume this movie, and I'm saying this,
then let's shit on it. Let's shit on this movie.
I'm saying this completely seriously. I think the way that the people who like sing the praises of this movie and voluntarily watch it because they want to, I think the way that those people interact with and consume this movie is genuinely perverted. I really do.
Yeah.
I think that having that amount of disconnect from the world and disillusionment about your place within it and ascribing getting that much fulfillment out of something this obviously targeted, I think is gross. And I think it speaks ill of your character.
We want to do a hard critique of the film right now. Let's go. You don't explain any of your symbols. It is the majority of the film is what should have been just the second act of the film. There's nearly no message to the film. You're speaking dead languages. That's kind of pretentious. And secondly, I think the whole thing's kind of a Jesus allegory. It's a little bit.
Yeah. It's a little heavy-handed. I want to touch on, because we talked about how kind of this led to a modern propagation of Christian-centric, like entertainment, which I think we argue is like maybe inherently a blasphemous thing to do. I think the Bible kind of argues that it's like, all you need is this book. If you have supplementary materials, what do you think, you're a better writer than like Titus or whoever, wrote a random book in there?
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, this movie is the launch pad, and he'd been in movies prior to this. This movie is the launch pad of the career of Jim Caviezel, a guy who, like, in an upsettingly relevant way, is still a relevant movie star.
Yes, besides the fact that it'll be in a sequel to this, he was in one of the most
profitable
talked about and profitable films of
because it doesn't
on paper
cost much.
Profitable
because it doesn't cost that much.
Mm-hmm.
He's in a movie that I almost even just hate saying the title of because I don't want to bring it up too much.
Terrible title,
but it's called The Sound of Freedom. I believe it is one of those based on a true story, but like really, kind of dubiously and irresponsibly retold.
Like Passion.
The guy's got his niche. Where the guy who most of America pictures as the guy who played Jesus, he plays I think it's
another Christ figure.
A guy who basically goes and stops a Pizzagate-esque child sex trafficking.
Is that what
Mexico.
it's about? Because like I'm only familiar with the discussion around this movie.
It's sex trafficking.
Oh, it is a Pizzagate film.
It's not about Pizzagate specifically. I just mean I'm like, it's appealing to the exact same thing, with this idea that like it creates a villain for you to get angry at and for old Christian people to watch.
And this was again another movie.
And now everything is solved because this guy went and, killed a bunch of people in Mexico. I don't know. I haven't seen the film.
It's another movie that's like that when it came out was like, you have to see this film. If you're a good American, you should watch this movie. If you're a good Christian, you should watch this. And
I think obviously that sort of guilt has always existed. Maybe the most enduring like effect of The Passion of the Christ is now that audience of people is used to being guilted in a way where they're told, it's your job. You have to go see this.
Yeah.
You're obligated to see this to be a good Christian, to the degree that now I think most people who are voluntary and active Christians are like, yeah, I know, I'm doing it Tuesday. Like it's not, it's like doing your taxes. They don't even actually look at it as like, I hate doing that. They're just like, well, I have to. It's not about whether I want to or not.
You should never be guilted into enjoying a film unless, of course, it's in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
That's a very cold take at this point. Like, because we actually last, it would be 2 weeks ago now. We like did a big post-mortem on how those movies have kind of just fallen flat on their face a little bit. And I have to cut us off right there. We do not have time for that.
We're not for that
digression right now. And this is not the place. But the analog I always put with Jim Caviezel is it's very similar to an actor who plays James Bond, or like Roger Moore. Every James Bond movie he was in, he like each time for his last like 4 movies broke the record for highest paid actor in a movie. But that was only because audiences already thought of him as James Bond. A fact that outside of that movie hurt his career. He couldn't get other roles because people are like, and Jim Caviezel is doing that, except for he's parlayed it into not literally having to play Jesus, but having to play in films that pander to a specific audience. And where he plays what is effectively like, what if Jesus lived in Texas and loved guns? That's basically how he plays his character.
Homer Simpson had a line about that. He's like, if Jesus had a gun, he'd be alive today.
Yeah. So I don't have much else to say about Sound of Freedom. It just felt
Does it line up with his politics at all? I don't know what his politics are. I imagine if you're going to be in that film, you probably have those politics.
Look, I don't know that much about Jim Caviezel. I have to imagine for him to want to go back and be a repeat collaborator with Mel Gibson, for him to be in a film like Sound of Freedom. There was one that was actually also part of the series that is actually a Christian action movie called Paul, Apostle of Christ, where I believe Jim Caviezel plays Paul.
Is it an action film?
It is like it's like he's like a hero.
What does Paul do? Like, he's most famous for writing letters.
I don't know.
I guess they made a rap musical about Alexander Hamilton.
He kicked someone's ass. I don't know what to tell you. Was he one of the ones who was like crucified in an extra fucked up way?
No, that was Peter. No, Paul, I think was. Oh, let's see. I don't remember. I know Peter was the one who was crucified upside down.
We're also going to follow this up with a ranking of the different apostle deaths. We're going to rank them 12 through 1.
Ooh.
I really don't want to do that.
Yeah.
We've kind of touched on them a little bit. Mel Gibson is planning on making what I think for a long time people thought was just going to be a sequel. When we looked this up after the movie, it looks like he's going to pull a Hunger Games and do a 2-part sequel.
Oh, yeah. But before we talk about, are we going into the sequel, or you want to talk about someone else with bad politics real quick? Because I have a good bit to talk about.
Why don't we get it out of the way? Throw it out there.
Have you ever heard of Yeezus versus Jesus?
No, but I'm going to let you just do whatever you're going to do.
So this is a fun bit. I got a little bit of a quiz for you. So I want to give credit where it's due. This seems to have been first posted on a website called youthgroupcollective.com.
Okay.
The premise is I will read to you a quote, and you have to tell me if it's something spoken by Jesus Christ or Kanye West.
Okay, cool. You quiz me, and I will.
I am a god.
That's Jesus.
That's Kanye West. Correct.
Kanye West. Yes.
How about I am the vine, you are the branches. Apart from me, you can do nothing.
That's Jesus.
Good job.
Okay.
Let's do healthy people don't need a doctor. Sick people do.
Yeah, that's Kanye.
That's Jesus.
That's Jesus?
That's Jesus. Okay, how about this? The only thing I want to do in life is help people.
That feels like a Kanye thing.
It is Kanye.
Yeah.
All right. Keep your nose out to the sky. Keep your heart to God, and keep your face to the rising sun.
Jesus?
Kanye West.
Wow.
It's harder than you think it is.
It's harder than you think, because I went in thinking
this is no promotion of Kanye West, by the way, at all.
No, but
it's just funny that this is even a topic. It just goes to show
that the way he talks about things now is so derivative of the way we've kind of repurposed Christ's words to fit the narratives that we currently live in.
I mean, there are also like a million versions of this game. There's one that's like, is this a Dr. Seuss character, or is this a urinary tract infection medicine or whatever?
So
it's like,
then I shouldn't,
or, you know, whatever.
I shouldn't have justified it.
Flomax.
Yes. That is, that's a urinary tract infection.
Yeah, or
medicine,
something.
right?
I don't know what it is.
So Mel Gibson wants to do a 2-part sequel to this. I believe the premise of which is that I guess it would technically be a midquel because of the last 30 seconds of the first movie. I believe it would be his trek through hell for the 3 days between Palm Sunday and,
Good Friday.
Sorry, Good Friday and
Easter Sunday.
and Easter Sunday.
There's so many. Yeah.
I feel like that would be a somehow even more torturous, disgusting film than this.
It might.
I guess aside from the fact that based off box office precedents, it would probably make a lot of money.
Yes.
Even in the parlance of a lie told to an audience, what would be the proposed reason for making this aside from it'll make a lot of money? Because we are talking about sacrilege.
I'm gonna talk. Well, because in theory, they're going to be doing the circles of hell, which is apocryphal. It is not in the Bible.
That's not biblical.
Hell is not even like mentioned in the Bible. It barely is at all. It's like, I don't remember if it even is mentioned at all, but everything that we know about hell comes from Dante. Or it comes from the Book of Enoch, because the Book of Enoch was an apocryphal script that was written maybe 200 years after the Gospels were, and that's where like the story of Lucifer comes from. It's not in the Bible. It's from a book, basically fan fiction, is where Lucifer comes from. Lucifer being the angel that fell and descended into hell
and became Satan,
or something like that along those lines.
I believe they are literally one-to-one. Like he just stopped being known as the other.
Yeah, something like that. Lucifer, by the way, is a mistranslation of the planet Venus, I think is what it is. Like Lucifer is mentioned one time as falling in the sky, and it's referring to the planet. Okay. Lucifer being Latin for falling star. Okay. Or falling light. But anyway, that's what I want to talk about is the sequel is this Jesus fighting his way out of hell or fighting his way through hell? Because I think it's much more cinematic if he goes down than if he goes up, but clearly he needs to go up. So do you think the first movie is down?
I
think it has to be down, or like, does he only get halfway there? Does he go through, I pulled up the list, limbo, lust, gluttony, greed? Where does he stop there? Does he stop at anger, heresy, violence, fraud, or treachery? That's the last one. Or does he have to fight his way up in the second movie? Where's the stopping point?
It's almost like you're saying conceptually, this film is a bad idea.
Well, yes, but what's the more interesting story? Him starting from treachery with Satan and seeing Judas again in treachery, or him going up and then he ends up in purgatory, which is like, that's a boring ending.
So I say the first of the two parts is him getting down, and he gets there, and it's like one of those situations like you talk about. Like,
this is assuming it's not Dante's version
in a National Treasure thing. He gets down there and he has to fight and beat Satan because of that we sinned, and he's gonna have to get down there, and they're gonna be stuck in a cave. And he's going to look at Satan, or he's going to look at Judas as if Judas is Sean Bean's character in National Treasure, and say, "I don't like you, but we got to team up."
Oh
and
my God.
They're going to and then the second one, buddy cop movie. Boom, that's right there. I've solved it for you. They're going to fight. They're going to
might do
ass,
that, and that's
the time ass right back up.
That's the time
hell.
They bring up the forgiveness stuff.
Yeah.
Wow, you might be onto something there.
You know, I'm going to be really fucking mad if I'm right. Because
you might be right. Like him forgiving Judas possible. Will be in there. Him forgiving Judas will be in the film.
That implies a certain degree of compassion on the part of Mel Gibson that I don't think exists, to be honest with you.
I don't think it's a compassion thing. I think it's a Jesus is better than you kind of thing.
Yeah. This is a foregone conclusion. I assume you'll be back whenever the new one comes out, correct?
Oh, yeah.
We'll sit down and we will have...
speaking of that, I think it's funny that I think I ended last episode saying something like, hey, bring me on to watch the most violent, fucked up thing you can find. And you probably passionate.
It's funny because you talked about the Terrifier movies, which I think we can both agree are like technically gorier films. They're almost clinically shot. It's weird the way those movies. But yeah, this movie is really upsetting.
Yes.
And not just on a visual level. It is, to me, as somebody who's spent a lot of time exposed to Christianity, who has kind of escaped the tendrils of it, you know, still deals with it a little bit. Not to like make this too much of like a therapy session, which is not what I want this to be at all. You know, I want to discuss how it exists within the context of culture, how seeing it this way kind of affected it. But I just, this is so distressing to watch, because you realize there are people who will watch this and look at it as like a really important thing, almost like an act of grace done by Mel Gibson. That's an opinion I've heard before, that he's doing the Lord's work. And the most frustrating part of this conversation is that we have to walk away from the end of it knowing that level of insanity is just going to continue existing. I don't have a solution to that.
Do you think a movie like this will ever be made again? I know they're making a sequel, but do you think we'll ever get something that is like this offensive, this like horribly like disgusting?
Because weirdly,
who would fund this?
Weirdly, the same. Let me see who made this real quick. I'm sorry. This was produced by Icon Productions and distributed by New Market Films. So not a major, not a major distributor.
But it's like clearly big budget.
If you're asking, would Paramount make this? Absolutely. No. Just like they wouldn't make it in 2004.
Yeah.
I think this is the sort of thing that, in the way that a lot of Hollywood has become really sanitized, in that even in like, romantic action movies, they're really desexualized. Actors, because they don't want to look retrograde, the characters are like, they don't flirt as much, or they don't, kiss. Their sex scenes are often excised from these.
There's no sex in this movie. In Passion.
Good.
No sex in Passion.
I'm going to say good.
Yeah.
I don't want that at all.
Very unsexy film.
I think that same kind of like sanitization of modern film that's happened that way, I think would affect this, because I think the idea of making something so explicitly about this subject would scare off all financiers. And I think it's the sort of thing, if something seems like an ill-advised enough idea, and we talked about how like Mel Gibson couldn't have made this after his DUI.
No.
Assuming that DUI still happened in 2006, because obviously it still would have.
Yes.
If Mel Gibson in 2023 or 2024 said, hey, I would like to make a film about Jesus Christ, even Mel Gibson, a guy who has a very upsettingly easy time getting things funded and getting jobs, I don't think he'd be able to pull this off.
The difference now is that Apocalypto exists. And I don't think a post-apocalypto Mel Gibson would get this film made.
No, I don't think so at all.
No, I think that would have been a big difference there, is that he did not have that.
Just like this film ends on the high note of Jesus showing hole in his hand.
Yeah, there's Jesus shows shot up his hole in his hand.
Yes. Just like this movie ends on a high note, I wanted to kind of bring this back to something a little bit more, a little bit less upsetting to leave the show on. You know. And with you, it's always the easy place is to go back to Nicolas Cage, right?
Let's go to Nick Cage.
Now we've talked about how he's
the one true God, as they say.
Yes, the one true God.
Yeah.
Yes. We've talked about how he has a bunch of movies in the can, even though he said he's kind of done making movies. I assume when he gave that quote, he said, not counting whatever's in the can, I'm going to, at this point, make another
he'll try,
2 or 3.
and
he'll probably make another couple beyond what's coming out. But
I think if Dream Scenario were good, he would have retired with that movie.
Yeah.
If Dream Scenario is good, it's just not great. If it were great, if it were like as good as Pig or Mandy, he would have retired.
Dream Scenario, I think, is like a 5 out of 10, honestly, is where I kind of come down. I'm like, it's not without ideas, but the pacing is so fucked up.
He's looking for something that's like artistic.
Yeah. And like his performance almost makes the movie around him look worse, because his performance is pretty strong.
Very good, yeah.
What are the next big things he's got coming up, like in terms of major theatrical releases?
Nick Cage or Jesus?
No, Jesus. Okay. Well, we know he's got, he's got a 2-picture deal. With Mel Gibson. What the hell?
Mel Gibson.
Yeah. So what are the next big Cage project coming out?
The one I know about, there are a few I know about. There's a sequel to Lords of War. Ill-advised. That movie has an ending. Don't need to make a sequel to that. There is. They've been talking about National Treasure 3 forever, but they made a National Treasure miniseries that he's not involved with.
I don't think they're going
to make that.
Because it's like, what are you going to do? Get John Voight involved?
There's a movie called The Surfer coming out. I don't know anything about it. All I've seen is there's a picture of him with a surfboard. Let's go. That might be cool. The one I'm most excited for, again, is the Oz Perkins directed horror film called Long Legs.
Okay. Well,
that one I'm most excited for. I don't know much about it. I try to go into a lot of these blind if I can.
As blind as you can. Well, it's good to know we've got some stuff coming on the horizon. Hopefully you have thoughts about those when they come out, because I'd love to have you back to discuss one of those instead of having the only thing on your slate be Passion of the Christ 2 Part 1.
Oh, yes. I mean, you can bring me back for the ultra violent, what did I call them last time? Ghost pepper films?
Ghost pepper films, a really great term that is just like just barely too niche for me to have found like an application of it. Just like it hasn't come up in conversation yet.
It's just in case you haven't watched the other episode.
It's very mentally sticky. It hasn't left.
Yeah, so Ghost Pepper Film is like if you haven't watched the other, or listened to the other one. The Ghost Pepper Film is like a film that you would watch on a dare, not like something you would typically enjoy, but just to say like, hey, I was able to survive through this kind of thing.
A Serbian film is kind of an example of something like that, where you're just like, it's like, can you endure it?
Yes.
Yes. So we'll keep an eye out for those sorts of things. But as always, I'm going to ask you the same question I ask everybody. Obviously, because we have specifically laid out plans for them, you can leave out any Passion of the Christ sequels or Nicolas Cage films. But I ask all my guests as my last question, what never going to happen screening, if we see is happening somewhere in New York, we have to drop everything to go to it and then discuss it?
Okay, yeah, I was actually thinking about this, and I actually have a real answer for this now.
Yes, of course.
I felt like I wasn't on the spot last time, but I knew what I wanted to watch. I think we've talked about this movie before. I don't remember if you've seen it or not, but if you ever see a screening of American movie,
it's happening, I think, like later this month at
Let's go.
at Alamo.
No, seriously, let's go, because I know they do that a lot.
I'll check dates. We'll make sure it works.
I know they do that a lot. Like, if you've ever seen this movie, you'll know that that's like half of my sense of humor is like totally stolen from those guys.
I'd actually love to sit down and do a documentary.
Because
I don't have anything on the slate yet. I love American movie.
There's a good Jesus line in that movie. Do you remember it?
I watched American movie. I think didn't really know what to make of it and walked away a little underwhelmed because you had really oversold it.
Yeah.
It is the sort of movie that every couple of months I have still kind of thought about and really, it's really interesting in a very different way from the other movies we've discussed. So actually, maybe we'll go ahead and put that on slate right after this, whenever we're done.
Yeah.
Anything to plug?
Oh yeah. I'll plug, right after this episode, or actually right before this episode airs.
The weekend prior, yes.
Weekend prior, I have a short film that has, I'm going to talk about it in past tense, that has debuted at the Norwalk Film Festival.
Yes.
Very excited about it. It's called PTO. I am the DP and star of the film.
Yes.
My wife, Taylor, is the director of the project. It was something we put together in a couple of days. It was kind of like a challenge. Let's make something that's mostly a silent film. And it's got into a film festival. Yep. So my entire head will be on a big movie theater screen, and I'm very excited about it.
I love PTO. It's a wonderful little edit. It looks so much better than it should given the resources available to you.
It was something we shot in a couple days, and we shot with anamorphic lenses that we just we have the gear. We just didn't really have the time to make something that was like too stunning. But like, I'm surprised how well it turned out. If you want to check it out, you can find clips or finished works of mine at alexandermcampo.com.
Mm-hmm.
That's
we'll make sure to put a link
Mike.
in the episode description as well.
You can find projects on there, some of which are still in the process, some of which are hopefully debuting elsewhere soon. But PTO is the latest one. It's got laurels, and I'm very excited about that.
Yes, yes, I'm very excited to hear how it's received there.
Mm-hmm. It's a dark comedy, is what I would call it too.
Yes,
that has a genre.
Yes, that one has an easily definable. Well, is that pornography as well?
What, PTO?
Yeah.
No.
Oh, okay. Well,
I don't know. I'm the one who made it.
Maybe
if you
I watched a different link from the one you sent to me.
Yeah, it's only 4 minutes. That's two more than I need.
All right. On that note, thank you so much to my guest Alex for suffering through this screening.
Thank you to Devin Warner for being a great host and the greatest b-boy of all time, I've heard.
B-boy?
Oh, this man doesn't listen to hip hop.
Oh no, I'm not. I'm a bit of a neophyte. And for being here to discuss this film, Alex, I'm always happy to have you here. Come back anytime for any of the things that we've put on the slate, or just if anything strikes your fancy. I always love sitting down for a conversation with you. I want to say thank you so much to Lily Steinberg for her social media management, promotional artwork, and helping to produce the show. If you see those fun Photoshops that we put out every week, that's her.
Oh my God, please do not Photoshop my face onto Jesus Christ.
Don't worry. We've got
you should actually make my text. I think I texted that to you. I'm like, you should just make that the thumbnail.
Don't steal my ideas. I want to say thank you to Kristen Ng for our logo artwork. And as we close out here, I just want to say, as always, this has been Bad First Impression. You can find the show on all socials at BFI Pod. We're starting to post more on TikTok and Letterboxd as well. And we've also got a subreddit going. Please help the show by rating, reviewing, and following on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever else you get your podcasts. If you're listening to this just after it's dropped, first of all, thank you so very much for doing that. Second, make sure to check out the video version later today on YouTube. If you have questions, suggestions, or thoughts, please reach out to us. You can just message us on Instagram and other socials, or you can email us at mailbag@bfipod.com. We'll try and answer your questions here on an episode. As always, I've been your host, Devin Warner. You can find me on social media at WhatIfDevin. And until next time.
Hi, glad to be back. Bring me back more. Love doing this. This is a lot of fun. Alex Campo here. Find me on Instagram, amcampo94, or again, alexandermcampo.com.
That's our show, folks. See you next time.